Hello and welcome everyone today to today's very interesting session on the Union Budget 2021. Indian Chamber of International Business is very happy today to collaborate with the Kanu Doshi Group, who are our knowledge partners for this session today. The budget is a very interesting session that we have been seeing in recent times. The changes that are being brought about affect all of us in one way or the other. Demystifying India's budget is one big challenge. And today's effort is a one such way where we and our team are there to help this for you and your business, and especially for MSME companies. We have with us the entire team today of Kanu Doshi Group, who will be with us and live taking your questions in the chat box while they're presenting, and they will take up the questions at the end of the day. So we are happy to have all your questions, all your queries, anything with respect to the budget. And while they're presenting, we'll be there for your questions. The teams will be simultaneously looking after. And please do post your contact details in the chat box so that you all can interact amongst yourselves also. This is a great session that we're looking forward to today. I would like to thank the Kanu Doshi Group and especially Kanu Bhai himself for being with us here today. A few words about the Indian Chamber of International Business. We are one of India's leading business chamber that is focused on international relations. Our presence in 39 countries has given us an advantage that we can take a mantle of introducing the Indian MSME sector to all these 39 and many more countries. We have our presence, we have our partner chambers, we have our own offices across the boundaries, let it be any continent other than Antarctica and the Arctic Circle. So with this, I would like to bring about today's session, and I would like to invite Shri Kanu Doshi ji for his opening remarks. Over to you, Kanu bhai.
Yeah, thank you, Manjeet, and thank you for your wonderful organization, internationally well known. Jayesh bhai, Mitesh, Rishabh, and Jyoti Ben, who is going to be sharing our thoughts on the subject. My role is to make a very opening introductory remarks, which will serve as a basis of the discussion that will follow. Now, we have got together today to discuss the union budget. Now, this budget, thanks to the remarks made by the finance minister herself, a very major departure from a normally customary diplomatic silence on the budget. Here was Nirmala ji, who went out of her way weeks in advance to say, await my budget, the budget like no other in last 100 years. So with that triumphant tenor, she presented her the budget, and true to her claim, the budget has been unanimously welcomed and received very well. And from all sections of our society, be it stock market, we also saw 3,500 points rise in the first 2 days itself. Today also was no different. Even today the market was hovering around 50,000. So the stock market has greeted it, celebrated it. Then you have top bankers from public sector banks, private sector banks, all welcoming the budget. Then you had corporate captains like Deepak Parekh, Kumar Mangalam Birla, and many eminent ones like that, down to an average citizen. So as I said, across the board, here is a budget which has been welcomed. The biggest undercurrent for this favorable response, as somebody put it, is a sigh of relief from the absence of any additional or increase in the tax rates. For example, we were all mentally ready to pay our COVID surcharge. We were mentally ready for perhaps a wealth tax on the equity shares thanks to the runaway bull run. We were expecting a billionaire's tax. Nothing of the kind happened. And that itself generated a tremendous welcome relief. All tax rates have been totally left untouched, providing smooth transition for yet another year of steady taxes. The initiative of faceless income tax assessment was introduced 2 years ago. Last year, it was extended to appellate proceedings, the first appellate proceedings. And this budget provides for even extending faceless part to income tax tribunal proceedings also. We need hardly say anything, the reason being underlying this faceless development. The reason is too well known for all of us to see. The idea is to reduce possibility of any corruption. Minor irritants like dividend distribution tax on real estate funds or investment funds have been also removed. In sum, here is a budget which is bound to trigger a huge, big infrastructure spending and thus entailed phenomenal, substantial all-around growth in the Indian economy. It's not only financial returns that will come because of the infrastructure spending, but even social dividends will come, economic dividends will come as a result of this spending. Like the entire country, therefore, friends, we also join in congratulating the finance minister for a real innovative budget like no other budget in the past. So with this, I hand it over back to Manjeet. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Kanuji. Thank you for this enlightening opening note. Here on, we would like to hand it over to the Kanodrishi Group and the team for the budget analysis moving ahead. The floor is all yours.
Thank you, Manpreet, and thank you, Kanu sir, for the wonderful opening remarks. Comments from veteran like you is always appreciated. So thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Yes. So, can you see my screens? Yeah.
Yes, Rusha, we can see it.
Okay. So good afternoon to every one of you. I have divided the flow of the presentation in three parts. One is the important policy changes, second is the direct tax changes, and third is the indirect tax changes which has happened. So I will start with policy changes which have been announced by the finance minister. A very important amendment which is going to be introduced is introduction of a vehicle scrappage policy. This was as expected by the automobile industry, because a lot of times what happens, the commercial vehicles are running for a number of years and there is no scrappage policy there. This is a very welcome move, and automobile stocks are making merry out of it, no doubt in that. Different acts like SEBI Act, Depository Acts, the Government Security Acts are now being consolidated and merged into one single act, will be Securities Market Code. Government is going all guns blazing in promoting GIFT City, and now they have come up with a proposal whereby it's going to introduce the world-class fintech hub in GIFT City. Similarly, the corporate bond market. India is not a very matured market when it comes to corporate bond market as compared to the Western countries. The government takes that as a cognizance and are going to introduce a framework whereby corporate bond market framework, where corporate bond market will be introduced in a big bang manner. Very important change is FDI and insurance limit. Earlier it was 49%. Now foreign direct investment in insurance companies will be 74%. However, there are conditions attached to it whereby the control of that insurance company will have to be with the Indian counterparts. Will have to be the Indian directors. 50% of the directors should be Indian, and a certain portion of the amount should go to general reserve. Next is a big boom for NBFC companies. Earlier, if I take a loan of around say 40 lakh rupees and I default in that loan, the SARFAESI Act would not have been applied. For the benefit of all, SARFAESI Act actually helps in recovering the amount in a very quick manner. Because once I go in a civil court, and the litigation process, as we all know, would take around number of years. But when a SARFAESI Act comes to my rescue, the recovery is much more faster. So a small-time investor who has taken a loan of more than 20 lakh rupees, and if it defaults into it, NBFC can apply SARFAESI Act onto that person and recover that money in a very fast mechanism. Some months ago, some years ago, there was a decriminalization of a Companies Act. Now the same has been extended to LLP Act as well. There's also a launch of MCA version 3.0. Earlier, the MCA website had a lot of glitches into it and was not very user friendly. Now they are going to introduce the new version of MCA website. There is also ease of compliances for small companies, whereby the turnover of paid up capital, whereby the turnover and the paid up capital limits have been increased. So earlier the paid up capital threshold was around 50 lakhs, which has now been increased to 2 crores, and the turnover of around 2 crores has now been increased to 20 crores. So any small company which is satisfying the criteria of paid up capital and threshold will now have a lot of ease of compliances. One may question that what are the ease of compliances which will be beneficial to small companies. One is that they are not required to prepare a cash flow statement. Similarly, the meetings which are required, earlier there were 4 meetings. Now I can do it with 2 meetings. Next is I don't require to disclose the director remuneration in the financial statements. So these are some of the benefits which are there for small companies, provided you are satisfying these conditions. So these are net all policy changes, and the finance minister in a speech has made this very clear that this all will be giving the impetus for a economy to go on a 5 trillion way. Okay. Let's go on to the income tax changes. Okay. Last year was a COVID year, not a very usual year. A lot of employees of a company were not able to travel. What the government did was they introduced a leave travel assistance scheme, which was earlier only restricted to government employees. Now it was extended to all the employees of private sector as well. Since people are not able to travel, the government still considered that and gave an exemption of say 36,000 rupees per person per year for a specific period, whereby you need to expend that for a specific purpose, and if all the conditions are satisfied, the leave travel concession which is given by the company to you will be allowed for a tax purpose. One of the thing for senior citizens is that if you have income, which is pension income or interest income, only just 2 sources of income, and you give a declaration to the bank of this income, you are no more required to file return of income. This will help a lot of senior citizens in easing their compliance of filing return of income. As you all might be aware that we need to pay advance tax at regular intervals, but capital gains is one of the items where I cannot estimate. I may be selling stock at the year end and I will not be able to estimate how much capital gains I will earn, and because of that failure to estimate the capital gains, I will not have to pay interest on that part because it's not an estimable expense. On a similar lines, since dividend income is now taxable in hands of shareholders, any dividend income which is earned by a person and which cannot be estimated will now not be considered for advance tax purpose, and there is no interest which is payable by that individual on that dividend income on failure to estimate dividend income. However, there is a condition that the tax which is there applicable on the dividend income will need to be paid before 31st of March. One important amendment which is there is that any contribution made by a person in employees provident fund or voluntary provident fund above rupees 2,50,000 rupees, then the interest earned on that portion will be taxable. So for example, if I voluntarily contributed say 3 lakh rupees, so that 50,000 rupees, which is over and about 2,50,000 rupees, the interest earned on that 50,000 rupees will now be taxable in the hands of the employee. Next point is where a lot of HNIs used to take multiple policies for unit-linked insurance premium. Now, as you all might be aware that ULIPs are basically a mix of a life insurance premium as well as investment policy. the government has taken a note of it that this is a popular tax planning tool, and what they have done is that where the aggregate premium, suppose you have taken a number of ULIP policies and the aggregate premium exceeds 2,50,000 rupees per annum, the maturity proceeds which you receive will be taxable in hands of the individual. This maturity proceeds will now be also taxes will have to be paid on that as long-term capital gains. STT also will also be applied. The industry has taken this point, and industry is now asking for a fair chance where the exemption is not available for policies which are not covered in ULIP, not under the benefit of Section 1010D. So, for example, since any maturity is taxable under long-term capital gains, for any of the maturity which is not exempt, I will have to pay tax on income other sources, which is a much higher rate than LTCG. So now they are considering to make a representation where the taxation is at par with exempt ULIPs as well as non-exempt ULIPs. Say for example, your firm has an international transaction and transfer pricing is applicable to you. The earlier provisions was that when a transfer pricing is applicable, the deadline of the firm was 30th November to file return of income, whereas the partner had still to be file a return of income as per as individual return capacity. Now that has been rationalized, and the due date of filing return of income for the partner of a firm in which TP is applicable will be the same as the due date which is applicable to the firm. For ease of doing business, there's one more provision whereby the return of income will now come pre-filled with all the capital gains, dividend income, and interest income you have earned. So this was pre-filled returns are already there currently, but with a limited income which is already shown, like some salary income would be there. The TDS income would also be already be there and there. Now with capital gains, dividend income, interest income, all will be populated automatically in the pre-filled return. So this will also have a lot of ease of doing compliances. Startup is one of the strong pillar which the government is focusing into. One of the advantage of having a startup is that I can claim benefit of profit on startups which I have earned for 3 out of 10 years for continuous period of 3 years. Out of 10 years. For that condition to be availed, the date of incorporation of startup had to be before 1st April 2021. And the government has now extended that provision, and if the startup is incorporated even before 1st April 2022, the benefit of profit exemption will still be available. Since startup are not very well funded and the government recognized that, the government had introduced the capital gains exemption, whereby if I sell my property and I invest that amount into a startup, the capital gains which I earn on selling of that property would be exempt. That transfer of property had to happen before 31st March 2021 earlier to help more and more startups to take the benefit of it. The provision has now been extended, and now the new date is 31st March 2022. As I mentioned earlier, the government is giving huge boost to IFSC. A number of conditions are being liberalized, I would say, to promote IFSC. Every year you would see a lot of changes happening to IFSC. This year also there are a couple of changes which is quite in favor of IFSC and it would help people to move their location back to IFSC. So one of the conditions is that if a fund manager who is right now situated abroad is willing to shift to India in IFSC, then that fund will no more be counted as business connection in India, and hence the taxation will be comparatively relaxed. Similarly, if any offshore fund who wants to shift their base to IFSC, tax neutrality has been provided. So whenever there's a change of location, and on account of that there's a change in shareholding of holdings which they have in Indian companies, the capital gains will be exempt. Similarly, for non-resident, if a company is incorporated in IFSC and it leases an aircraft from an aircraft, currently the aircraft leasing hub is Ireland. If a company situated in IFSC leases an aircraft from a non-resident, that income will be exempt in hands of non-resident. That royalty income will be exempt in hands of non-resident. Similarly, a non-deductible forward contract which a non-resident enters with an offshore banking unit established in IFSC will be exempt. Also, an offshore banking unit which has an investment banking division and which has applied for a category 3 AIF license, the income earned by that investment division will be exempt, provided the condition is that there's a different set of accounts of books which are maintained by that category 3 AIF or that investment division which is operating from IFSC. Equalization levy is a very important. So what is equalization levy? First of all, a lot of people might not be aware what is the concept of equalization levy. For the benefit of all, equalization levy is basically when a non-resident service provider renders services to a residents in India. That non-residents have to pay tax in India. So let's take an example, like Netflix is there. Netflix is providing services to residents in India. The revenue which Netflix earns from India is now under purview of equalization levy. This was introduced around 2 to 3 years back, and now the scope is now more rationalized and more expanded to bring into ambit different companies. One is that a welcome change is that if any particular transaction on which the tax is already paid as royalty or FTS, or it's classified, the income is classified as royalty or FTS, then there will be no equalization levy, as the same would lead to double taxation. Similarly, when there's a mechanism of sale and purchase, a lot of supply chain managements are involved, that I place the order, the goods are then delivered to me. So earlier the understanding was that I had to satisfy all the conditions for equalization levy to be applied. Now it has been clarified that even if you are doing one leg of a transaction of online sale of goods or online provision of services, then equalization levy would apply. Similarly, there are a lot of, let's take an example where Amazon is there or Flipkart is there. They themselves don't own the assets. However, they provide a platform whereby goods are listed by the sellers, and as a buyer, I will purchase the goods from that website. So even if I don't own the goods and I just provide you facilitator services, equalization levy would still apply to it. Coming to TDS, this is a very important change, as all of you might be aware that earlier there were provisions introduced that where a person does not have a PAN in India, higher rate of TDS would apply. This has now been extended that even if I have PAN in India and subsequently I don't file return of income in India, the TDS has to deduct at a higher of the rate. Now, the question over here comes is that I have to deduct tax on some other person. He has not filed return of income in India. It's my responsibility to deduct tax at higher rate. But how would I come to know whether he has filed his return of income in India or not for last 2 consecutive years? Now that is an anomaly. This is applicable from 1st July. And what needs to be done over here is that the deductor would now be required to take a declaration from the deductee that he has for return of income, so that the responsibility of tax reduction at source is appropriately discharged over here. Because otherwise what would happen is that the declaration will be given, if the declaration is not taken by the deductor, and subsequently you realize that he did not file return of income in India, it may be quite possible that you might come into scrutiny for short deduction of tax. Another important change is that on purchase of goods, the TDS has now been introduced. As all of you might be aware, sometime back the government introduced TCS provision, tax collected at source provision, whereby the seller on sale of goods had to collect the tax at source and deposit to the government treasury. Now this has been exactly reversal put in TDS provisions, whereby if I am buying a goods from the seller, it's my responsibility to deduct tax at 0.1% on the amount of goods purchased. There are conditions attached to it that my turnover should exceed 10 crore rupees. Similarly, that value of goods exceeding the entire year should be more than 50 lakh rupees. So this is the important change, that if at all you estimate that the value of goods you are going to purchase from any party is exceeding 50 lakh rupees, you will have to deduct TDS on it. A question would come over here is that for a same transaction, whether TDS is applicable or TCS is applicable, because both provisions are there. The government of India specifically, the finance minister specifically mentioned in memorandum that in such a case, TDS provision would take preference. So a deductor is more responsible to deduct and pay tax to the government treasury. This is an important provision. So let's take an example that I take a land and building, I purchase a land and building, and according to me the valuation is 100 rupees. My case is credit or scrutiny, and the officer comes up with a valuation of say 115 rupees. Now there's a difference of 15 rupees, and the officer would always want to tax at a higher value, that is a stamp duty valuation, and my say consideration is then considered as 115 rupees instead of 100 rupees. The government realized this, and every year there's been an increase in limit. So last year it was increased from 5% to 10%. This year it's increased from 10% to 20%, whereby if at all, even if the stamp duty valuation is within that 20% limit, then there will be no additions made to it. So this is a very welcome provision, and this will help a lot of inventories to be sold, which are lying unsold till now. This is a very important provision when it comes to mergers and amalgamations or reconstruction of a company. So what happens is basically earlier a lot of tax planning used to happen in case of slump exchange. So what is slump exchange and what is slump sale? Slump sale is basically when I'm selling off an entire unit to another entity, and in exchange I am being paid cash for that unit. A lot of people used to do a tax planning over there where they instead of slump sale they used to have a slump exchange. In a simple layman term, slump exchange is barter. I give you unit, instead of unit, on exchange of that unit you give me some other thing instead of cash in bank. Since there was no provision existing in the act to tax slump exchange, people used to use this as a tax planning tool. The government recognized this and amended the definition of slump sale, and due to this thing, now slump exchange is also covered as a part of transfer, and any barter system is also will covered under capital gains tax net. For partnership firm, earlier it used to happen that the section provided that the dissolution of firm, on dissolution of firm, the distribution of capital or capital assets to the partners was taxable in hands of the firm. In absence of explicit provisions, when there was a retirement of partner without dissolution, there was a stand, and there were different court judgments which were for and against, whereby it said that retirement of partners also covered under capital gains tax net, and the firm would still be required to pay tax on it. There are also contradictory case laws where it says that since the act explicitly mentions dissolution of firm and not any other thing like retirement or reconstitution of the firm, any distribution of capital assets will not be taxable. To clear this, the government has now amended the provision of the act whereby it says that any dissolution as well as reconstitution of the firm, which in a way will include retirement of a partner, will now come under the tax net, and the firm will still have to pay tax on it. Another important point in this is that there were a lot of adjustments which used to happen by revaluing the assets. This revalued assets, then the transaction was placed in such a manner that the assets were revalued in such a manner that there is no tax outflow on it. The government realized this, and to plug this loophole, they explicitly mentioned that any adjustment on account of revaluation of assets will have to be reduced, and hence this again comes into tax net. Similarly, any distribution of capital assets only was there for tax purpose. Now, any distribution of capital assets as well as any cash payouts to the partner will also come under the ambit of capital gains tax net in hands of the firm. One important provision is depreciation on goodwill. As you might be aware that there is a lot of controversy going on this point. So what people used to do is that earlier is is that I have purchased the goodwill from some other company, and I used to show it as an asset and as an intangible asset, and used to claim depreciation on it. There's a Supreme Court case law on it, which specifically allowed me to claim depreciation on such goodwill. This goodwill going forward, this depreciation of goodwill going forward will not be allowed. The government has now made it very clear that the Supreme Court case law is now set apart, and going forward, any depreciation of goodwill would not be allowed to the company. In any case, if the company has purchased goodwill, then that goodwill purchased would have to be added to the cost of acquisition. So, so if you have paid any amount as goodwill for purchase, that amount will be added as the cost of acquisition, while when you are subsequently selling your company, right? Similarly, till date, a lot of companies have already claimed depreciation on goodwill. That goodwill, that amount will not be allowed going forward. That depreciation will not be allowed going forward, and that depreciation, which is already claimed, has to be netted off against the purchase price which is paid for goodwill. So going forward, if your purchase price is 100 rupees, you've already claimed goodwill of 50 rupees, right? The net amount of goodwill which is to be added to the cost of acquisition on subsequent sale will be only rupees net of 50 rupees. You cannot claim the entire 100 rupees. This is a very important change which has happened, and the M&A industry is right now in a fix, because a lot of open points come with this amendment. This amendment is applicable for FY 2021, which means that I've already finished 10 months into it, and all the deals which are almost on the finalization stage and where goodwill plays a part of that deals would have to be reworked. Similarly, one important point if you consider is that companies who have already claiming depreciation on goodwill, the advance tax portion would be much low, because depreciation is an expense and my profit would be lower. So my advance tax would have been computed at a lower rate right now. The moment I say that now this is not allowed for this current year, my advance tax working goes for a toss, and it may be quite possible that I may need to have a huge interest outflow because of this amendment provision. It is expected that the industry will file a representation against this, and hopefully there may be a guidance coming from the finance minister or from the CBDT of what needs to be done of this existing year, that is FY 2021. Litigations, as you all are aware that a lot of amendments have come in the past number of years, whereby the interface between the government and the taxpayer is now reduced. The government has introduced faceless assessment. Last year, it also introduced faceless penalty. Now the government is taking it forward by introducing faceless tribunal appeals. So we have already faceless assessments. We have already faceless penalty hearings. We also already have faceless appeal hearings. Now going to the next leg, which is faceless tribunal hearings. So going forward, IT hearings will also be faceless. Similarly, they've also introduced a concept called as Dispute Resolution Committee. This is more beneficial for small taxpayers where the return to income is less than 50 lakh rupees and the adjustment proposed by the officer is less than 10 lakh rupees. So instead of going to the long route of getting it through the officer, CIT, ITAT, this committee will be much more helpful and to resolve case much more faster. Settlement Commission has been discontinued. Authority of Advance Ruling will now come up in a very new avatar. Similarly, the reassessment proceedings, which is a very beneficial and welcome provision, which was earlier that I can open reassessment cases for past 6 years, and now been reduced to past to only 3 years, and that also with prior approval of Principal Commissioner of Income Tax. Also, if a officer realizes that an tax assessee is putting fake entries and fake invoices, he may levy penalty onto it. But there was one thing which is amiss over here, that during penalty proceedings, the officer did not have a right to attach properties. So now this has been changed. So if at all any assessee who is now doing fake invoices and the property value is more than, and the penalty value is more than 2 crore rupees, the assessing officer has the right to attach properties as well. Now reassessment notice earlier earlier were managed in a very different manner, whereby state order used to come that their case has been picked up for scrutiny and you need to make all the detailed submission. Now it has been revamped, and it's a very welcome change whereby the assessee, the individual taxpayer, is given an opportunity, or corporate taxpayer is given an opportunity whereby you can actually argue in the front of officer that whether this case actually needs reopening or not. And if the assessing officer is satisfied that yes, this case does not require reopening, all the subsequent part of issuing of notice under section 148 and a reassessment order goes away. So this is a very welcome change. It will save a lot of litigation cost for the taxpayer as well as the income tax machinery. Due dates have been changed now. So intimations now has to be issued within 9 months instead of 12 months from the end of the financial year. Similarly, scrutiny notices under section 143(2) has to be issued within 3 months instead of 6 months. Belated and revised return, the due date is now moved earlier. So earlier it was 12 months, now it's moved to 9 months. Okay, coming to the last slide, from the direct tax perspective, one important change, what the government clarify, or it's a perspective, it's still a question. But what happened is that as an employee's contribution to provident fund, there was a controversy that if I don't pay it on time, say my due date as given in the Provident Fund Act is say 15th of May for April payout, and if I pay on 16th or 17th of May, whether that will be allowed or not. There were two views possible. One view said that since it's paid after due date of that respective act, it will not be allowed. The other view was that the provision of section 43B, where it said that if I am paying that payment before the due date of any return of income, it will still be allowed. A number of case laws are there, number of judicial precedents are there for and against this argument. The government has now come out and mentioned that this due date has to be considered is of the respective Provident Fund Act. So any payment which is done after 15th of May in my example will have to be disallowed. Now a question that remains open over is that for companies which have already taken that stand where the due date where they have considered due date as per defining of return of income, what would that happen? The return of income is yet to be filed for a lot of companies because 15th is the deadline. Will I need to change my stand? The amendment explicitly mentioned that this is applicable from FY 21-22. However, somewhere in the language it says that it's clarified. It always intention always there. So this is an anomaly which is there existing, and it would be better if government comes up with a guidance of what needs to be done on this point. Similarly, presumptive taxation is now no more applicable to LLP. In fact, it never was, but there was still people were not very clear about it, and there was still interpretation which has been taken on other way around. Now the government has clarified that presumptive taxation in section 44 ADA, which is for benefit of professionals, will not be applicable to LLP. So if an LLP comprises of professionals, presumptive taxation will not be applicable to that LLP. REIT and InvIT, real estate investment trust and infrastructure investment trust, any dividend which is received by them, TDS will not be applicable on them. Similarly, foreign portfolio investors who are making merry right now of stock market, they receive a lot of dividends from Indian companies, listed companies. Now, what our situation is that my income tax act says suppose say 10%, and the tax avoidance agreement from with the FPI is coming say 5%. Now, what will happen is that I will withhold tax at 10%, and ultimately, if I return of income, the FPI will offer the income at 5% and will claim refund of that 5%. So that 5% is effectively stuck till the time the refund is issued. The government has realized this and mentioned that while making payout, the FPI, if they furnish the tax residency certificate TRC, the applicable withholding tax rate will be as per DTAA, that is tax avoidance agreement, or the income tax rate, whichever is more beneficial to the FPI. One important point in promoting cashless economy, the government of India last year made a change of tax audit report threshold. whereby the threshold tax report was 5 crore rupees. So if anyone who is earning a revenue of more than 5 crore rupees and having cash payouts and cash payment of less than 5% was not required to do a tax audit. This threshold is now increased to 10 crore rupees. So take an instance that now my turnover is say 8 crore rupees and I don't have any cash transactions. I will not be required still to do a tax audit report. MAT provisions have been rationalized now, whereby a foreign company who is earning dividend income will now no longer be required to add dividend income to its MAT computation of income. Similarly, for foreign pertaining to transfer pricing, MAT provisions will have to be considered on that thing. The rules have not yet been notified. For that provision, the CBDT will prescribe a mechanism whereby the MAT will be computed in case of secondary adjustments. Net, I would say that the budget is good. As Kanu sir rightly mentioned that a lot of things were expected, a lot of taxes were expected to be levied and feared by common man, COVID cess, or something, or various other changes. This all has not been done by the finance minister. A very simple and plain budget, few clarifications and very welcome clarifications which will help in avoiding litigations, and few points which are hopeful that the finance minister or the CBDT will clarify. So yes, with that, I end my session on direct tax. I would now hand it over to Jyoti for taking over the indirect tax part of it. Thank you.
Good evening.
Jyoti, over to you.
Good evening, everyone.
Jyoti, you're not audible. Can we be a bit loud?
Yeah.
Can you just speak something?
Hello.
Yeah, you are audible, but volume is very low.
You're very low.
Very low.
Now it is proper?
You can be a bit louder.
Okay, fine, no problem. So, in terms of indirect...
Or you can use without the earphone, maybe, I think.
No problem, fine.
Yeah, this is better.
Okay, so in case of indirect taxes, there are few amendments, but they are quite major in terms of benefits which will go to especially various specific industries. So first and the most important thing is relating to refund of IGST for exports. Now, when we are doing supply of goods or service with payment of taxes, okay, now government has come up saying that it will be restricted and only be provided as per the notification which will yet to be notified to class of person or class of goods or services. So if you're doing an export with payment of IGST, which earlier was the refund was automatic, system driven, was sanctioned as soon as you produce your shipping bill details, that option will no longer be available for all the exporters. So I think this is something will affect the export community because the refund which was easily available will now be again restricted. Similarly, refund option without payment of tax also has been linked with realization of sales proceeds. So, if you are doing an export and if you have not received the funds within the time limit prescribed by RBI under FEMA, then what the provision is saying that you have to deposit the refund back along with interest. Now, currently, if the limit under RBI is 180 days, and that can be definitely be extended further depending on the circumstances. So this provision will have huge implications on the exporting community. And I think what government is now looking forward is that everyone who is doing the export has to take refund through the input mode, which definitely goes to the local authority and local tax authority. So I think that's where it will work now. So there has been no amendment or suggested amendment in that process. Similarly, supply of goods and service to SEZ. It was treated as zero-rated supply. However, what has been proposed is that they will come up with a list of authorized operations. So it will be treated as zero rated supply only if that SEZ or SEZ developer is involved in authorized operations. So I think this again will restrict the benefit of doing it without payment of taxes. Now, the other important amendment is relating to interest. Now, this was expected and it's a welcome move. So, this amendment has come retrospectively from July 1st, 2017, which clearly says that if there is any interest liability, it has to be on the net cash outflow. So, if I have got GST liability, I will minus all my input credit, and whatever is the net liability, net cash liability, on that only I am liable to interest. Now this clarification or amendment has to come because there were various notices which are issued by the authorities where they have asked for interest on the gross outward liabilities. Moving ahead, GST audit. So this was a mandatory requirement to get your annual accounts audited and furnish the reconciliation statement. Now they have gone ahead and removed this requirement. So now the taxpayer has to furnish only the annual return with self-certified reconciliation statement. So there is no need of a audit. Moving ahead, we will just take it ahead. In terms of definition, so they have amended the definition of supply of goods or service. So what they've done is that they've included any club or members. So what it means that if there is a club which is serving its member and getting any consideration through cash, deferred payment or other method, it will be considered as supply under GST. So this earlier clubs were not taxable because there was a Supreme Court decision. Now club, association of person, if they are doing any supply to their members, it will be treated as supply under GST and will be taxable. Similarly, they have changed the definition of self-assessment tax. So earlier what used to happen is that the tax liability was paid through GSTR 3B. So now they have gone ahead and amended the definition because there were a lot of writ petitions which were filed, which were saying that the liability is, whatever is the liability as per 3B is not a liability arising from the basic GST law. So now they've gone ahead and amended this definition, and they're saying that the tax payable has to be on the basis of outward supply as furnished in GSTR 1 and not as per GSTR 3B. Okay. Now related to that, what has been added is that if there is a liability which is shown in GSTR 1, however, there is a gap, so lower tax has been paid through GSTR 3B due to whatever reason, then they can definitely, department can start direct recovery proceedings in terms of attaching a bank or bank account or a property and so on and so forth. So I think this again will lead to various litigation and various, what I will say, taxpayer will spend a lot of time in all these things to ensure that they remove their bank accounts and property from all these recovery proceedings. Similarly, they've clarified specifically pertaining to how you can avail the input tax credit. So they've put a new condition which was earlier there through the notification, but not in the base of GST law. So a new condition has been proposed, which reads that input tax credit on invoice or a credit note or a debit note can be availed only if that has been furnished by the supplier in GSTR 1 and the credit is reflected in GSTR 2. So it's been very clear that if there is any mistake which is done by the vendor while filing their returns and because of which you are not getting the credit, so there is a clear denial of credit even if there are genuine mistakes. I think this has now come in the law through this budget, Okay, so the most important thing is, if you want to avail an ITC, it has to reflect in GSTR 2A2B, because now that provision has been added in section of the GST law, which was earlier not there but in notifications. Moving ahead to the changes done in customs, so a new SAS has been introduced, which is Agricultural Infrastructure and Development SAS, with effect from February 2nd on import of goods. So this the rate will be same as the basic custom duty on all the items which are reflected in the first schedule of customs tariff. Simultaneously, basic custom duty has been reduced on all these items so as to avoid any additional burden on the customer. The rate varies from 1.5% to 100%. So if it is same as basic custom duty. So if the rate is say 5% basic custom duty, the same will be the Agricultural Infrastructure and Development SAS. Similarly, there has been a provision which has been amended pertaining to bill of entry. So what they are clearly saying is that they may request on specific goods or pertaining to certain specific custom stations that the bill of entry should be filed one day in advance, or they may clearly specify when it should be filed. So this is just the time period may be given on the basis of the port or on the basis of class of goods and so on and so forth. There's been a new penalty provision which has been introduced. This is again will to ensure that a lot of incorrect refunds have been taken by exporters. So there have been instances where the refund taken by exporters are on the basis of fraud or fraudulent input credit, or their supplier have taken the credit on the fraudulent invoices. So this provision has been specifically introduced to ensure that if it is identified that the input taken is because of the fraudulent invoices, then you have to you will be liable to definitely deposit that refund, and you will be liable for a penalty which is 5 times of the refund claimed. So this is the penalty provision. So if you go through, even under GST, there will be a lot of provision which has been added, especially to counter this fraudulent invoices. And this has become a news every day, where we open the newspaper and government has found out so many fraudulent invoices, so many people involved, and so on and so forth. So I think a lot of measures have been taken to curb this. Moving ahead, they have also come up with a new custom common portal, which will really help everyone to facilitate registration, filing of bill of entry, shipping bills, payment of duties. Also, this will be used for servicing of notices, orders, summons, and all these things will be available for a taxpayer to view on the portal. I think these are the key changes which we have seen in the indirect tax regime. And we are open for any questions relating to these.
Yeah, that brings us to the. We are open for questions if any. So guys, if you have questions, please unmute for type and we'll be happy to address it.
Hi, it's Sherry Singh. My question is, I deal with India-UK business, and for businesses entering or looking to enter into India with respect to special economic zones, what are the benefits of that sort of entry?
Right. So as such, when you say special economic zone, if a company wants to establish if a foreign company wants to establish a branch in IFSC, there are a lot of benefits which is available. Government, as I mentioned, is promoting GIFT City, and if you see GIFT City, there are two components. One is the finance hub, and others IFSC over there. So IFSC is a bigger part of it, and GIFT City is a very small part of it. And IFSC has been accorded a SEZ status. So yes, when you say you have a entity established in SEZ, the profits will be exempt for a prescribed number of years.
Interesting. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Good to know.
Yeah, if there are any queries, you can post this panel right now. We are here for next couple of minutes. And
Before you
or else,
go.
Sure.
Okay. Could I also ask, with respect to Indian companies coming to the UK, for example, are there any benefits to the Indian companies from that perspective with respect to finance?
Sure. If I understand correctly, your question is that if a UK company wants to establish a company in India, will there be tax benefit in India, or the other way around?
No. If an Indian company,
okay,
for example, wants to expand, and they can either do business with the UK or they can set up a company in the UK. Is there any benefits provided by the Indian government for that Indian company?
No specific benefit.
Well,
sorry. I stopped you, I guess.
Yeah, no. Hello.
Yeah.
Rushabh, let me take this.
Yeah.
Hi Shahryar. We recently did a transaction on these lines, where an Indian entity acquired a running business in the UK and also set up its an immediate holding company, an immediate wholly owned subsidiary down in the UK. Now, as per the government, of course, there are no new benefits accruing from this budget on these transactions. However, the existing double taxation treaties, etc., they do exist, and they do allow you to not be taxed twice on the same money. The dividend income is taxed at a lower rate for foreign dividends, which accrue if your foreign operations is getting profitable and you want to repatriate the money back to India. But an efficient tax planning can be done on those lines. But any new benefit, nothing as such. The budget has been focusing more on inbound investments rather than outbound at this point of time.
Okay, so if it's inbound, is it more favorable? Is the climate now more favorable for overseas companies to enter into India?
Yes. So an overseas company entering India, it all depends on what business you want to do. So, for a financial services company, like we mentioned, a GIFT City is a very good alternative, given the lower tax regime, other added benefits being there. For any new manufacturing setup, there are also, a very low, one of the, lowest taxes in Asia that you can get if you are setting up a manufacturing entity in India, and that is for the next couple of years. You should start commercial production. Then, besides that, all the treaty benefits still accrue back for the company wherever the ultimate holding company is.
Okay, and you call these GIFT City, is that correct?
So GIFT City is India's first international financial service center. Is one of the prescribed, you can call it an SEZ or a earmarked location where a foreign a foreign owner can set up a company, or an Indian owner can set up a company. So it's called
okay,
the
thank
GIFT
you.
City, but it's
You
just
can maybe write to us further questions on this. And we can maybe support you in that.
Lovely. Thank you very much.
Great. Any questions? If anyone has anything specific on the budget, that was there any provision in the budget, we would welcome that, so that can give clarity to everyone. Okay. I think so.
Hi, Miten.
Yeah, Bihari.
Mitesh, I had a question on the, the 9A provision. There were some changes done on the, 9A and, this taxation for AIFs in Gift City. If you can elaborate specifically for 9A and, Gift City, that will be helpful.
So basically, it says that the provisions for fund managers who are wishing to relocate into IFSC, it will be relaxed. The conditions are yet to be prescribed at which conditions needs to be satisfied. So we have to wait for fine print to come. But as of now, just an oral guidance is given over here. And let's see how the government proposes to bring that rule and what conditions will be relaxed.
And one question for Jyoti. Jyoti, you mentioned about GST, the whole, that the liability of interest is on net,
Yes.
GST liability. So does that mean whatever interest we have paid earlier will come back, or that is gone?
No, we can go ahead. So we've always paid on net BD. We've always paid on the net liability also only. But if you paid extra, you can go ahead and apply for a refund.
Okay, thank you.
Great. So I think we are not seeing any further questions. So thanks everyone for your patient listening. Hope our team could answer or give a brief idea about most changes or provisions that have come. I will hand over back to Manpreet for his closing remarks on this. Thanks, Manpreet.
Thank you, Mitesh. It's actually an honor to have such a learned and well-read team from your side. And, you touched upon all the topics of the budget. Let it be taxation, let it be GST, direct taxes, indirect taxes, provisions regarding partnership, proprietorship, and all these associated when it comes to investments from abroad, investments from India to abroad. And I think it was a nice way where we tried to put in as much as possible in the little time that we had. I would really like to thank Kanu Doshi ji and his entire team, Mitesh, Jyoti, Rushabh, and everybody else that has been supporting today. Thank you very much once again. For all the members, I request if any of the queries are there, please send them to us by email. They've put their contact details in the chat box, or you can send it to us at ICIB, where our email ID is office@icib.org.in. And for convenience of everybody else, we will also be uploading this recording of this session on YouTube, so that if you all need to reference it at any time, we'll be able to do that at any time. And the links will be shared across all participants in a day or two after the editing is done. Thank you Thank you so much, everybody from Kanu Doshi ji and his team. It was our pleasure to have you.
Thank you,
Thank you, everyone. Thanks.
Thanks.